Hey guys, welcome to lesson number 29 in our drawing series from beginner to pro. I'm quite happy with the progress that we've made so far with shadow. I've worked a little bit more in the darker areas with my 7B pencil, and what I really want to concentrate on today in today's lesson is working around this muzzle area and starting to get a little bit of the detail into this nose area, and I just think that it's going to start bringing this to life. So I'm going to crack on with this, and I'm going to start with my 2B pencil. I've sharpened the pencils already, so I'm just working in that crease right in the center to start with. I want that to have the most value in that area to begin with, because that is like we say, that's a recess. Now we've already got some value in these nostrils, so we just want to keep defining those. We're using our tapered strokes still, as always. If this is the first time that you visited my channel, thanks so much for visiting. If you go back to lesson 1 to 6, where we've got some of the essential skills required, I know it's nice to jump straight into something quite detailed and a little bit more involved, like the drawing of this dog that we're currently working on. But if you're brand new to drawing, or you're brand new to this type of technique where we're not using any blending stumps, we're not using anything to smudge the graphite around, what we're doing is we're layering and we're building up values using different pencils. If you are new to this, like I say, then I really would suggest going back and having a look at some of those earlier videos. By all means, give this a crack, but you might not know exactly what we're talking about in some areas. But we're using basically a tapered stroke here, and a tapered stroke is a series of lines where I'm just pulling the pencil down towards me. So this kind of whipping action, somebody described it as like they're whipping eggs. And what we're doing is we're putting the lines very close together in this area, and that's going to then give us the kind of texture and coverage that we want for this nose. Now, this nose it's one of the areas that's going to really attract the viewer's eye. That shine on the top of the nose in this region here is going to be one of those highlighted areas that we really need to capture. I can see this eye as well. The white area around the eye is another one of those details that really draw the viewer's eye towards it. So we need to capture those. I do talk an awful lot during my tutorials about contrast and making sure that we've got the contrast throughout the drawing, but certainly identifying your lightest area and your darkest areas throughout your drawing, and then working around those, making sure that nothing's darker than your darkest areas and nothing's lighter than your lightest areas that doesn't need to be. And we can see that as this dog's nose reaches this point here, it's rounded, so it comes out and round in towards this crease. So we need to define that in our drawing by tapering the value out towards it, towards that center line. The beauty of this method, where we're not bearing down into the graphite, bearing the graphite down into the tooth of the paper, is we're going to be able to take some of that value out later on with our kneaded eraser and our mono zero eraser. I tend to use only about 6 or 7 pencils. I don't have a whole range of pencils that we're going to be using. I want you to be as clutter free as possible. So we start with our H pencils and we work up towards the B pencils, which are the darker pencils. Now, if you're unfamiliar with pencil grades, pencils nowadays are made from a mixture of graphite or carbon and clay. So an HB pencil, which sits right in the middle of your grades of pencil, is a 50-50 mix between clay and graphite. So it's actually why it's one of the most commonly used pencils. If you go into schools and places of work, HB will be the pencil of choice for most of these places. because it's that perfect mixture between clay and graphite, it means it's still fairly hard, it holds a point, you're not constantly having to sharpen it. But what it also means is you've got enough of the graphite in there so that you can make some fairly dark strokes of the pencil. Now, as we work towards the B pencils, what happens to that mixture is it becomes less and less of the clay in there and more of the graphite. So your 8B, 9B are going to be much darker, but they're also much softer. And what happens there is the graphite tends to come off the pencil easily and is easy to move around without the need of blending stumps and tissue paper or even fingers. I've seen some people using their fingers to great success sometimes. But we want to have that ability to be able to remove. I'm just moving up to my 4B pencil now, which could perhaps do with a bit of a sharpening actually, if I'm being totally honest with you. So where was I? Yeah, so we're working up and taking away value and adding value as we see fit, but we're working in a very methodical pattern or structure to what we're doing, so that we never go too far and make huge mistakes and have to then totally erase any of our work. I can't remember the last time that I had to start a drawing from scratch because I'd made a mess of it. We can take away whole areas and start again, but there shouldn't really be any need or any excuse for us having to take away the whole thing and start from scratch. So as I'm building the value up in certain areas, I can see areas that I need to also build the contrast up. So I was looking then at our dog's eye, and I just like to move around the drawing really and build it up as a whole. Now I can see that this line comes slightly down, slightly lower than what looks like the general shape of this dog's nose. It almost comes down into a V shape underneath the nose there. So I'm just trying to capture that, making sure that we are paying attention to all of the details. I'm constantly flicking my eye from the reference image over to my drawing. In this case, I did mention it in our last video, I've actually got my iPad in front of me as well, because the reference, as I've printed it out with my cheap paper on a relatively cheap printer, I don't get the definition that I really want and the definition that I need in order to allow me to make a very crisp and clean looking drawing. So I've got the iPad in front of me where I've got the reference image also up there, and that just gives me a little bit more detail, and I can zoom in on certain areas as well. So I would suggest that's a really good practice for you. I don't know, obviously tablets are quite expensive and it's not always accessible. It's not essential, but it's certainly something that I do tend to do at time to time. So now I'm just going to start to define this edge of the nose here. What we talk about when we're learning to draw, whichever method you're using to actually learn how to draw, the laws of light are one of the most profound things that you can learn, and the understanding of how light works and how light hits certain objects is incredibly important. And it's a very simple concept. Anything that the light hits first is lighter, starting with our highlighted area. So as we're looking at our reference here, I can see that almost these eyebrow areas here are almost our lightest areas. There's some very, very light areas in there. And from there we've got areas that aren't quite as light and areas that are darker. And and whatnot, and it's capturing those opportunities throughout our drawing that really take our drawing to another level. So I'm coming back in with my 2B now, which is slightly harder, and because I'm not pressing on with these pencils to the maximum pressure that I can take them, there's always some value left, even in a grade of pencil lower than what I was currently using. So I was using the 4B in there, but there's still enough value left with this layering method to get something out of this 2B. Because what I need enough value in this area to be able to take some out, to give us the appearance of light hitting the edge of this nose here. We'll be using our brush soon enough just to spread some of this graphite around, which will then give us a wonderful opportunity to take some out. Now, looking at the texture of this dog's nose, we've got what almost seem like black dots, and then in between that we've got the areas that the light's catching. So it's important that we capture some of those, and anywhere that we lay graphite down, that's always going to be a darker area than an area that we've neglected initially and then working. So I can always keep this area slightly darker by laying those initial areas of value. So I'm going to use my brush now. I use a very soft brush, a makeup brush will do, and I'm just going to brush some of this value in, even into the actual nose of the dog here, and then that's going to give me the chance to take some of this out. So now what I'm using something called a mono zero eraser. It's like a mechanical pencil, but it actually has an eraser in the end, and that's just going to give me the chance to remove some of the graphite in this sort of spotted pattern around the edge of this dog's nose. Then I can just remove any excess from there. So let's come in now with our 7B pencil, which is a very, very soft pencil, and I'm just going to again start working in the darkest areas. The nostrils are always going to be one, if not the darkest point on your drawing. Possibly the pupils of an animal or a human being are going to be the darkest, because they're obviously holes that just sit inside the eyeball. So there's very little light that escapes from there. There's nothing for it to hit. It is just a recess. But the nostrils run it a very, very close second, I would say. Just paying attention to where the light's hitting. We've got an area next to the darkest point, that crease that runs down the dog's centre of the dog's nose, which is the dark line that it looks like. Next to that, on the right hand side of it, is a highlighted area. It's not as light as the reflection on the top of the dog's nose. Nevertheless, it is lighter than the surrounding area, so I'm being careful to pay attention to that. Okay, so I'm just going to start to darken up this pupil again a little bit now with my 7B pencil, because this again it's got to be equally as dark as the nostrils, maybe even slightly darker. So as I'm drawing this, I don't want to leave it behind, and the immediate area around the edge of this eye is also very, very similar in value to the pupil itself. Okay, so I'm going to now come in with let's go with a little bit of HB pencil now, and we're just going to start bringing some of the value around the edge of this, or the bottom of this muzzle. And I'm making these very small V shapes, because when we look at fur and hair, we do find that we have lots of these sort of V-shaped patterns throughout the coat, and to give the impression of shorter hair, we make these little V-shapes quite short, and if we need to have something that is representing a longer hair, then we just make those strokes slightly longer. And what that does is if we're getting the general direction and pattern that the hair's making there correct, it gives the illusion, because that's all we really are working with. We're working with illusions. We're almost magicians. Artists are almost magicians. We're tricking the person that's looking at our artwork, making them believe that there is light hitting and things are rounded and things have form and shape to them, when the reality of it is really all they're looking at is a two-dimensional piece of paper, a flat piece of paper with marks on there, and those marks can be created with pencil or charcoal or coloured pencils. So I'm just taking note as to where the darkest areas in the general flow, so these hairs are just starting to change directions ever so slightly as it comes down and around. But I can already see now that this highlighted area is going to really start to draw the attention to the eye. And we're going to have to make sure that as we continue to develop the value in the rest of these areas, that we do keep using our eraser to move some of that value away and just bring it back slightly. So I'm going to come in now with the 2B pencil. I think I'm going to possibly just move some of that graphite around with my brush. I'm going to come in with the 2B pencil now, and I'm going to, again, I'm sort of working in this area on the reference, because again that's quite dark under here. It's not quite as dark as the very dark patches, particularly on the nose itself, and certainly not as dark as the hair that is around our wolf or Siberian Husky, as I think let's just call it shadow, that we've sort of decided upon. There's a few of you on the group that know people with this breed of dog. I think we've identified it as a Siberian Husky. Whilst we're on the subject of the group, we're coming up to 2,500 members now, which is unbelievable. And I know everybody's not necessarily posting their work or commenting, but you know, to have that amount of people on there is certainly more than I ever intended, well, not necessarily intended, but imagined we would have. So thank you so much for joining the group and drawing along with me. In the initial days, I used to joke that it felt like I was making these videos for myself and just sat here talking to myself of an evening, and I was watching. But it's evident now from the Facebook page that there's quite a few of you that are taking part and having a go at some of the lessons, and it's lovely to see some of the new members on there having a go at some of the earlier lessons. So some of the barrel work and some of the sphere work, which is all so important and really, really valuable when it comes to learning these skills. And I'm basically trying to teach you everything that I learned over the last sort of 3.5 years. It was 3 summers ago that I really started drawing, so about this time of the year. And I've spent money on courses and bought paper that was rubbish and bought paper that was good and bought materials that didn't work and whatnot. So I just thought it would be nice to try and give something back, and if I can help fast track some of you onto an artist journey, then fantastic. So as this dark hair now starts to come away from this area, the V shapes become sort of more spread out. If you actually look at our reference, and we have some of these separated, I guess it's that this dog actually looks as though he's wet. It looks as though he's recently been in water or he's been drinking. And this is sort of how the fur starts to clump together. And we're just laying out some initial details here. We don't need to be perfect, and we certainly don't want to be concerning ourselves with trying to get every single strand of hair in place. You're gonna do your own head in if you try and do that. It's almost impossible. You see some of these hyper realistic drawings that people post on Instagram and online and whatnot, but some of them are absolutely huge. If you actually look at the work that they're doing, you know, they're working on, look like billboard sized pieces of paper sometimes. And yes, you can work much more detailed in that, and what they then do is they take a photograph of their work, and they shrink it down, and obviously on Instagram and Facebook it looks as though they've got the most detailed piece of work that you've ever seen. But the reality of it is what they've done is they've spent 7 months getting every hair in place. Now we're working on A4 paper here, so we're not necessarily needed to get every strand of hair in place. So I'm just working my way around now, and I'm just looking at where some of these darker hairs, even within some of the lighter patches, where are some of these darker hair strands and shadowed areas falling? Because as I start to build more value up in these areas, it gives me an opportunity then to take strands of hair out and work with the graphite that's sort of already there. I'm going to go to the HB, I think. I don't want to go too dark in these initial areas. I'm just looking at the general flow and the ebb and flow of this hair. Looking for patterns that look familiar. A little bit like looking up at the clouds on a nice summer's day where we've got these lovely white fluffy clouds, and it's very easy to imagine shapes and dragons and dinosaurs and things like that. And just looking for things like that in these clumps of hair that are just going to give you a waypoint almost sometimes, just to really help you plot where things are, where things line up, and what we're ultimately on is we're on a destination of the destination we're hoping to get to is being able to freehand from start to finish. I think that's every artist's goal, particularly people that work with pencil, and it was certainly what I wanted to do. There's a lot of artists out there that say using the grid method's cheating and all these things, but nothing's cheating, because what we're doing is we're working our way towards being able to freehand. And all of these lessons, they're invaluable. So learning to freehand this fur in, looking for these shapes, these familiar patterns, all aid us. And you'll be amazed after you've done a few of these drawings where we've used grid lines or we've used the dividers. You'll be absolutely amazed and astonished at how well you can start to freehand things. I would say start with some cartoon work. That's what I initially did. I started doing a little bit of cartoon work and doing some anime and things like that. People were requesting them over on my YouTube channel in the early days, and I thought, well, I'm going to have a go at these, fairly simple line drawings. I'm going to have a go at freehanding them. And much to my amazement, I was actually able to do them much better than I could do before this process. So this process of drawing with grids and using tools to measure, and even go and get yourself a light box and trace to start with. Get those initial lines down. You teach your eye how to see the proportions of a face and where the nose lies and where the hairline ends and things like that. And with enough practice, you can start to develop a very keen eye for detail, which is the art of drawing. There's the application of the medium that you're using. So whether that's paint or charcoal or coloured pencils, there's a technique to all of those that we have to learn, and we're learning a technique with that graphite here. But once we've got the technique down, it's then really about training your eye to see detail. So I'm just working around this eye now. I can see that we've got some value in there that I need to get. I'm going to take some of those highlighted areas out in there with my Mono Zero eraser. I want you to just see how much value we've actually got. I don't know if you can see that, but if I just hold this up now to the camera. So we're working in this area and we've got some beautiful opportunities there just to take some very light hairs out. Just again working the tapered stroke, looking at the almost the grain, the direction that this hair is falling in, and it's giving me some very realistic white hairs. And we've got a lot of white hair on this dog, but as you can see, we haven't drawn any of them in. We're working in the negative spaces, we're working in the dark areas, the shadows, we're lurking in the shadows, and then we are taking out so look at this now in this eye. This is, I love it when we start to get opportunities to just bring these highlights out, just taking that ring of value out around our dogs. Iris, I'm going to work again in the these irregular but semi or regimental and organised patterns and fashions. I'm just taking some of the value out with this Mono Zero razor. And like we said earlier on, now I've removed some of the graphite from these highlighted areas, they're always going to remain lighter areas. So no matter what I now do with this drawing, I'm always going to have this lighter area as a reference. I've got some lovely long strands of white hair. And this is our lightest area, this beautiful, it's almost an eyebrow. Wow, he's oh yeah, that's some fantastic, we've made some real progress with this evening. I'm really happy with how that's starting to turn out. I'm coming back in now with my 2B and I'm just working again and just defining some of those darker areas around this muzzle. I've got the definition between this and what we're doing is we're building layers up, and this is what's giving us this this furry look, this depth to the animal's fur. We're making those initial layers. If you cast your mind back to when we started, I'm just removing some of this excess graphite from around the edge. I'm just getting rid of that, almost that halo effect. Just with my kneaded eraser there, I can actually take away some more value in this. I'm just paying attention to the direction that these hairs are moving in there, curling out and away. But yeah, this layering opportunity is one that you have to really get to grips with and understand. And once you grasp that we can go back in and we can add more value and take value out, but the value that we took away is going to be a lighter patch still than the surrounding area. Once we grasp that, your art starts to take on a new dimension. I'm going to come in with the 7B in here now. Now again, the secret weapon that we always have to our disposal, and we're going to leave that right at the end, is we've got our black pencil crayon, our polychromos that I'm using. You can use a Prismacolor or I guess any brand of pencil, but I like the polychromos because it keeps such a fine point that it's brilliant for hair. But we're going to keep that just for our darkest areas, so there's definitely going to be some black pencil crayon in the nostrils around certain points, but we don't want to go in with that too early, because one of the tools that we do, or one of the techniques that we're trying to master here, is being able to move the graphite around into the lighter areas, and that's still then going to be giving us the opportunity to take it out. If I haven't got any graphite in these lightest areas, I'm going to really struggle to take any of these white hairs out. And although there are techniques out there that we can use to add a white hair, we can use different tools and implements. I've got some white gel pens that I use for some of my cartoon work that will put a lovely white hair in there. I'm trying to teach you raw classical art drawing. The way that I learn, you can turn your hand to anything then. So learn how to draw a white-haired dog with pencil, and then you're going to have absolutely no problem in the future using some of these, like we say, some of these fantastic tools that we've got to our disposal. So I can see we need much more value now around this eye. And that's the beauty of working from the dark to the light areas. I have suggested before that there are other artists, and I'm sure there's maybe even some of you on the group that work from the light to the dark, but I like to work from the dark to the light because it gives me a sense of where I need to work next and how much value I need in certain areas, and also it gives me an understanding of when my drawing's finished. I can also then move the graphite from the darkest areas, like we have been doing, into the lighter areas. If I was working initially on this drawing in the light areas, I may have too much value in the light furred areas, and then have to then bring the value up of the darker areas too much, which can lead to the drawing looking off, can take much more time than we really needed to spend on it, because we're having to bring values up. And so just again paying attention to those fine details, not worrying too much about trying to capture every single strand of hair. Seeing where the darkest points are within the dark areas, where's the lightest part even in the light part of the drawing. Remembering that the light struggles to go round bends. The darkest areas are always going to be the furthest away from the light. So identify my light source early on. Where's the light coming from? Where's it striking? Is super important. And again, like I mentioned in most of my videos, I don't tend to move my paper around as much when I'm videoing as I would do if I was actually doing this without filming it. I want you guys to have as good a viewing experience as possible. So I tend to not move it around too much, but I want you guys to move your paper a lot. So we've got a very dark area underneath this, on this bottom lip where it curves up. If you've not joined our Facebook group, come and find us. It's called Tutorial Tuesdays, Beginner to Pro. If you ask to join, request to join, I'll accept that. We're quite a friendly bunch. We've not had any stupid posts for a long time on there. We've not had any silly requests and argumentative people on there, which is fantastic. We are primarily there to share what we've been doing during the lessons and any work that we're particularly proud of, and ask questions. And we're quite a grown-up group, quite mature, even though there might be people on there that aren't too old. It's been a real pleasure getting to know some of you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you hit the notifications icon, which is the little bell icon next to where you've subscribed, it just means that you'll be notified exactly when I do release a new lesson and the next stage on. Don't forget to give me a like if you fancy it, if you think that you're getting something out of these tutorials, which I hope most of you are. Then I really appreciate all of the likes and comments and the shares. I don't think some of you realise sometimes how much that really does mean to small YouTube channels and getting the message out there, but also just getting as many people drawing. And drawing really has changed a lot about what I do, and I'm very passionate about sharing what I've learned. So it really does help if you're just, pushing these videos out there by, like I say, liking and commenting on them. It'd be really nice to get to know you over on Instagram. You can find me at artisticn1k, which is the same name as the YouTube channel. It'd be brilliant to hear from some of you on there. And if you do follow me, just drop me a DM or a comment on one of my pictures saying that you're part of the group, and I'll follow you back. Again, it's so important to try and help one another. Social media can be a real minefield, and if you need any advice, and like I say, I'm not the world's guru on social media, but I've been doing it a fair amount of time now. If you need any help, just let me know, and I'm more than willing to try and help you in your endeavours. It'd be lovely to see some of your work. I've come across some people's work that they've been doing in the groups over on Instagram, and it's funny seeing some of the drawings that we've been doing in class just randomly on people's feeds. It's fantastic. It gives me a lot of pleasure seeing that something that we're commonly working together, a common goal, and just seeing how people are doing with that. So I can see now, looking at the time, that we're on sort of 41 minutes, and I do like to try and keep these videos to around about 30 minutes. So we've gone a little bit over tonight, so I apologise for that, but I kind of started to really get lost in this and started to really enjoy how this was starting to turn out. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue just developing a little bit of the value around this muzzle, taking some of the white hairs out with the Mono Zero razor. Don't forget to find us over on the Facebook group and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video. Hit subscribe, smack the notifications button, follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.